Now, there was another example of this kind of racism this week, endorsed by no less than Joe Biden, President of the United States, whose stupidity, by the way, is now a threat to the West. It occurred at his climate summit. What a disgraceful farce that was. I am gobsmacked that Biden, on that Thursday and Friday last week, insulted the intelligence of 39 other world leaders, including our Prime Minister Scott Morrison, by making them listen to the ravings of a bizarre parade of alarmists and mystics and New Age tribal women and even a teenager. It was amazing. Now, Biden called this summit last week to force countries like ours to slash their global warming gases even more, at whatever cost, in money and jobs, while the world's biggest emitter, China, by the way, is meanwhile free to increase its own.
The health of communities throughout the world depends on it. The well-being of our workers depends on it.
Now, what is so telling is that the speakers Biden invited to his great big two-day climate conference last week did not include one climate scientist. And I think the reason was pretty simple. It would have been too dangerous to inject facts into the debate. I mean, scientists might have told him that, whoops, the temperature of the planet has just dropped to below the average of the last decade of last century. And what's more, Stephen Koonin, who was the scientist who was the US Undersecretary for Science when Biden was Vice President and Barack Obama was President, has now written a book called Unsettled, saying that global warming is a gross exaggeration. He says heat waves in the US are no more common now than in 1900. Humans have had no detectable impact on hurricanes. Greenland's ice sheet isn't shrinking any faster. And bushfires are burning 25% less area than 2 decades ago. But that's just science. And the global warming scare is now about something completely different. It's a religion with a touch of Marxism. It's been completely hijacked. So who did Joe Biden and his team ask instead of scientists to come lecture the world leaders they had captured in this conference? Well, one of their speakers was a girl aged just 19. Would you let your 19-year-old run your household budget? But here is a 19-year-old telling us how to run the world. She's in her first year at university in America. But she does say she's from a Mexican tribe on her father's side. And I guess that being Indigenous today makes you instantly wise and holy. So world leaders were treated to a lecture of the latest far-left university babble.
We demand comprehensive, non-Eurocentric and intersectional climate education, including literacy on climate justice, environmental racism, ancestral and Indigenous wisdom, on historical movements, disability justice, green careers, and sustainable living.
Yes, ancestral and Indigenous wisdom is needed to fix global warming. So I wonder, what did the Aztec gods of Mexico recommend to this girl's ancestors to cut the emissions back when her ancestors were offering them human sacrifices, living hearts cut out of men's bodies? If only we knew. And if only we could have people of colour, not whites, lead this global warming crusade.
But most importantly, all of these solutions must be implemented with the voices of frontline Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities as leaders and decision makers.
Yep, no whites, please. Oh, no. Now, it is outrageous that Biden served up that steaming nonsense to 39 world leaders. And she wasn't the only one he trotted out. There was also Achana Sareng, a 25-year-old former student activist who identifies as a member of India's Karya tribe, which again makes her suddenly wise, even when she's prattling New Age eco-bull and suggesting that we go back to the forests.
Mass climate education incorporating Indigenous worldview should be core to nature-based solution. Nature-based solution should recognize and support the traditional knowledge and practices of Indigenous youth and promote their forest-based livelihood.
On it went with this nonsense. President Biden also had an American Indian turn up to claim that Indians had centuries of timeless wisdom on how to confront climate change. I thought climate change was a new problem. And the leader of the Association for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad in Africa claimed Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge is the key to helping all of humanity adapt and mitigate climate change. Now, look, let's be blunt. The time for, polite applause for the poor person from Africa. I mean, we should look to the Indigenous people of Chad for advice on how to power our advanced 21st century economies. Chad, which the United Nations Development Programme says is in the lowest category of all human development. In fact, it's ranked 187 out of 189 countries and territories. Chad can't even run itself. But here were the world leaders being told, you've got to listen to Chad's Indigenous people about how to run the economies of the advanced world. Has the West gone barking mad, so lost confidence in its technical know-how and its culture? But with no scientists around, anyone could claim any wild thing. I mean, here's the only Pacific Island leader chosen for Biden's summit, the President of the Marshall Islands, trotting out the old fake drowning islands scare.
We are a low-lying atoll nation, barely a meter above sea level.
Now, for real scientists with integrity who'd been there, they could have pointed out that the most recent measurements of those Marshall Islands and other atoll island nations like Kiribati and the Maldives show they are not drowning. They are, in fact, growing in size. As the top expert on sea levels in the Pacific, Paul Kench of Auckland University, said in January, the majority of islands in each of those nations has either got larger or stayed very similar in size. So why was Biden insulting our intelligence with this utter nonsense? And why didn't our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, dare call it out?